I'm Aaron Richman, the field evangelist here at VergeIO. Maybe could we kick things off and have some introductions? Greg, you wanna lead the way and introduce yourself to the folks that have joined us?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Greg Campbell. I'm the CTO of Verge and also the founder. So I've been here since the beginning of this journey. And then my core focus with the product is the overall architecture and how to pull all of this together to build this private cloud operating system.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Greg. And also with us we have Kit Colbert today. Kit, would you care to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Kit Colbert. Presently I'm on the board, just joined the board actually here at Verge. So very excited. Met with a bunch of the team yesterday. Formerly, I was at VMware for about 20 years, starting as a developer. I was like the vMotion guy way back in the day, and eventually becoming CTO for the company right before the Broadcom acquisition. So obviously, I have a lot of contacts in the space and very excited to be working with the Verge team.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we're thrilled to have you here, Kit, and great to have you here on this panel today. George, how about you for an introduction as well?
Background on me, been with Verge now for almost 3 years. I was prior to that, I ran a company called Storage Switzerland, storageswiss.com. Still kind of use it as my personal blog. Did that for about 14 years studying storage and infrastructure.
We want to get started with this topic of why now and what potentially is the wrong exit, meaning just a hypervisor swap. Maybe that's not exactly the right exit. So with that, Kit, we really want to get started with you. And you've talked about how you run engineering at VMware for a long time. You watched the Broadcom transition from the inside. When you kind of look at the space today, you see people moving to other platforms. Is there something people may be getting wrong at times? Do you want to give us some insight into that?
So obviously, a lot of changes have happened since the Broadcom acquisition closed, and a lot of pricing changes. And I think a lot of customers are, being forced with some decisions. And I think a lot of folks, if they're looking to move to an alternative, think about maybe how quickly can I do this? Can I just make a quick change and keep on going? But I think what they're missing is a real opportunity. It's kind of the saying, like find the opportunity in the crisis, so to speak. And I think the
Right.
opportunity here is how do you think about architecting your environment for the next decade, the next 2 decades? And when you start thinking about it that way, it requires a fundamental shift in technology, in architecture. It's not just going to be a like for like change. It's how do you fundamentally change something to set you up for not only today's workloads, but all the workloads that are coming, all the containerized cloud native apps, AI apps, etc. So I think that's the big opportunity that people may not be thinking about because they're so worried about, the near term pricing impacts.
Greg, when a VMware customer tells you they're moving to another platform, take your pick, whichever one is out there. Is there an architectural problem around that maybe they're not solving?
I think it's to Kit's point, you're kind of looking at the short term problem and maybe ignoring the long term and this really is an opportunity to take advantage of a new architecture. I mean, we got where we are now, just natural evolution. Nobody did anything wrong. It's just the way, we were working with a bunch of core technologies that had to be developed from scratch, like the hypervisor and virtualized storage and virtualized, software networking and all these components. So naturally they all formed as all these separate pieces, separate companies, but this technology's gone through decades of advancement. We kind of have learned these things. And so Verge was able in a position where we were able to look at the whole picture and really start to build out the architecture of the future by, really pulling all these things together. And so, I see that's probably the biggest, you know, thing I see there is, when they are looking at all other alternatives, yeah, I see it as more of just, you're just kind of, you're doing a little bit of first aid and just trying to solve a very small problem and not taking advantage of this switch because no matter who you switch to, whether it's us or somebody else, it's going to be a lift. You're going to have to change things, change processes, rethink some things. And so, now it's kind of the time to rethink take a step back and look at things through a different lens and maybe, treat things as this whole that, treat your infrastructure as one thing, your this operating system to run your infrastructure and make sure that it's set for the future and can handle all these, the new performance requirements we're going to have and security requirements and all that, that the legacy architecture creates challenges for.
Let me, if I can jump in, I just get Kit and Greg, I just get your feedback on the poll. It's kind of interesting if you add up temporarily renewing, actively evaluating, and planning to evaluate. If I do my math right, you're almost at 60%. You add the 23% that have already migrated off. Now you're at 70, 80%. That's a big chunk of the market actively looking for an alternative. Any reaction to the poll results so far?
Not surprising. I mean, I think it aligns a lot with, I've had a lot of conversations, especially as I started to engage with Verge, spent some more time talking with customers and just trying to get a feel kind of on the ground reality. And yeah, I think most folks are in that mindset, right? Like they might be doing a renewal because they haven't had time to really think through the transition. But once they do that, the first thing they're going to do is like, okay, how do I make a move? How do I change? And I think, again, the big point here, as Greg talked about, is that you look at a lot of these companies and technologies have been around for a decade or two, and the industry has advanced quite significantly. And so if you were doing it from scratch today, or even the last few years, you would do it very differently than it's been done in the past. And I think that is the opportunity that Verge really presents here. It's a way to think very differently about how to go forward.
Greg, what are your thoughts?
Now is the time to revamp the architecture, to look at it as a whole. And I'm not surprised one bit that there's this many people, looking to change. And to Kit's point, even if they're not making the change immediately now, they're at least thinking about it and kind of looking at, okay, this is a big move to make right now. We can't do this right now, but we're sticking with VMware a little bit longer, but we are beginning the process of figuring out how to get off and how to.
To Bob's point in the chat, I do think a lot of folks wait too long, and because it's going to be, it's probably it's a multi-year journey depending on how large your environment is, and you got to test out new technologies, you got to validate them, then you got to migrate everything. It takes a while, and so again, it's like if you're going to do all that work, to Greg, your point, I thought it was a really good one. You're going to do that work irrespective of whether it's just a like-for-like swap out or a fundamental re-architecture. So it may as well, let's look at what great can really be with a re-architecture.
I think right now would be a really good time because I love it. Give me the origin story. What actual problem you're starting to solve and how we ended up with VergeOS.
The concept for it started a very long time ago, and probably about 16 years ago, and I was trying to solve what I thought was a very difficult problem at the time. I was building a search engine from scratch, and I thought that would be a really good technical problem to solve after I had sold my last company. But it was very eye-opening to me. I'm trying to build this thing that can, it's storing billions of sites, and I need compute workloads distributed across multiple servers and network, high throughput networking and all this infrastructure. And what I found is, 80% of the work I was doing had nothing to do with the search engine at all. That actually ended up being the easy part. The hard part was, how do I create this supercomputer that can process all of that? And so I was building, trying to, virtualize networking and, virtualizing workloads and building a distributed file system. And I realized that was probably the bigger opportunity that, much like what, DOS and the hardware abstraction layer of a desktop operating system did for a PC, we kind of needed that same thing for multi-server. We need this hardware abstraction layer that can allow us to put something on top of this pool of virtual resources at scale, at distributed scale. And so that's kind of what led to the origin of building out this cloud operating system that could pull all the components of what we need from networking, compute, storage, just all of that into one thing, so we could develop software without dealing with all the mess under it.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the history, so let me take people back a little bit. When I first started at VMware, 2003, so the company was 4 or 5 years old. At the time, we still had to build our own hypervisor, right? Like there wasn't a lot of processor support yet. So we were solely focused on compute virtualization. And, there were a lot of things that were just unknown. We didn't know if we could support more than one processor in a single computer. Like we didn't know if that was possible to do in a virtualized environment. We figured all those things out, and like over time, what you found is that okay, we got compute virtualization going pretty well, and then we expand and say, oh well we need storage, and then we need networking. We need to try and virtualize all these different aspects of the data center and all the data center operations that go along with that. And so it's kind of a piecemeal, part by part iterative process over the course of, let's say, a decade and a half, almost 2 decades. And no one at the beginning knew what the end vision would look like. It just wasn't really possible to know that, right? Because none of these technologies had been invented. And so um, I think the big insight is that what you see with a lot of the companies out there, it is this like multi-decade sort of just accumulation of technology versus a really well thought out from the beginning structure or architecture. And the difference, as Greg's saying, is that as he and the team went to go build this, they had the benefit of hindsight of looking at what VMware, Nutanix, et cetera, have done, and looking at where the architecture and where these technologies have gone, and then be able to take a fresh start at that and saying, let me rethink this from the ground up. Like if I were to restart, redo VMware today, knowing everything that we know, I would do an architecture very similar to what Verge is doing and what Greg has done. And again, it's nothing against VMware. It's just at the time, no one knew what all
Right.
these like fancy things are going to come. So I do think that with these couple of decades of experience in the industry and all the knowledge that we as an industry have accumulated, we can now do things in a much fundamentally better way that, as I said, supports these traditional existing workloads, but more importantly, positions us and you all to be able to support the next generation of workloads.
How do we keep people from feeling like they have to build an entirely separate infrastructure to run AI? Doesn't it make more sense to be able to run your traditional applications, your containers, and AI on fundamentally the same infrastructure software?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big opportunity here is that, um, you know, what Greg and team have built is like not just the right architecture, but they've taken a lot of craftsmanship with how they built it as well. Like I'm really impressed in terms of the conciseness, the compactness of the code base, how efficient it is, so that you have this single operating system, hypervisor that can run either in giant data center server or at the edge in a much smaller device. And so it's got that sort of flexibility to support many different deployment profiles as well as application types.
The efficiency in the code base, Greg, is definitely something that I think people are starting or have already come to recognize is eliminating the what we've previously thought of as integration, but is actually overhead. I guess I have a question for you, Kit. So we're talking about the next decade or the future. It's not just VMs, right? You've mentioned a little bit containers, maybe AI inference. What is this this future that people need to be ready for that we are perhaps able to help them better with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it today. Like the amount of, I mean, AI is kind of taking over everything, and we're seeing it certainly in the software engineering profession, which
Mhm.
I'm a part of, very close to. Software engineers leveraging AI, people are building applications based around AI, and so I just see there being more and more of these things. And what's interesting is if you look at a lot of the SaaS services today, like there's a lot of costs that goes into token costs that goes into those things. So I actually think that there is going to be a big shift back on prem as people start thinking about, hey, I can buy these GPUs myself as long as I can make sure they're utilized. Um, I can run them locally, run them at high scale. And so I think we're going to see a lot of folks starting to do that. Um, and so I think what that's going to drive is the need for a really strong and versatile software infrastructure layer. And that's exactly what Verge is producing here. And so whether it's enterprises, smaller customers, as we talked about, like edge use cases, maybe retailers, you're going to want things running locally in the retail store, or even to higher scale operations like a lot of the neo clouds, all these data centers that are getting built out to support all these AI workloads. Again, the need for a versatile software infrastructure abstraction will be critical.
We have customers that are running in incredibly small environments, right? We have customers that are, University of Michigan is one that always comes to my mind as somebody that's at massive scale. Am I correct in my, assertion that that's all because of the code?
The efficiency, yeah, the efficiency is huge. So, my job, with the architecture of Verge is to make sure that we are not only, giving the efficiencies and performance that we need today, but to also make sure that we're set up for these future workloads. It's not an overkill thing to be ultra efficient with this. All those individual components trying to work together, they're never going to be able to run at the same efficiencies just because of even just hops. And we're getting into the nanosecond realms of, nanosecond here or there means all the difference. So you really have to have an architecture that supports it. There's only so much you can optimize by just, patch a piece of code here or a piece of code there. It really is an architectural problem to keep you, um, future proof, right?
Let's talk a little bit about the polling. 80% of the people are concerned about licensing and renewal costs. Let's talk about a little bit more about what we did and how we got there. And so, we took all those, Greg, you went to set about and said, okay, how can I get all of this to work in one thing, essentially? And you basically came up with this, right? Where you integrated all of these different layers of things into a single piece of code.
And the goal, as ambitious as it may be, the goal was to have it where the OS is giving you everything you need to run your whole business. Like literally plug the carriers into us. We'll run everything from your BGP down to the workloads, take care of all your redundancy, your backups, site management, automation, everything in one, while still allowing you to somewhat, pick and choose how much of that you want to use. We're going to give you firewalls, we're going to give you VPN, we're going to give you everything, NAS, but that doesn't mean you have to use all those components either. But in order for us to get the advantages, to really realize all these advantages, it's best for us to put a lot of this stuff all into that same unified thing. But that is the goal, though, is to give you everything you possibly need if you want to use it, but also be as flexible as we can on how you deploy it.
Kit, as you were kind of researching this, I think this is one of the things that caught your attention, right?
Yeah. So it's funny, when I first started engaging on this opportunity with Verge to possibly join the board, etc. I didn't know much about Verge, and so I, sat down with Greg, and he was explaining. You guys sent some of the documents over. I was looking through them. I was like, "Wow, this is like pretty cool." And as I said before, it's definitely one of those things that, with the benefit of hindsight, with the benefit of all this industry experience, Greg and team had this opportunity to do things very differently. And for all the reasons that Greg's been talking about, the simplification, the efficiency, like ease of management, et cetera, all these benefits accrue because of this very fundamental architecture shift that they're driving. And I was like, shocked like in a positive way. I was like, holy crap, this thing's like really cool. That's what really got me excited. The fact that this was or is sort of a diamond in the rough, if you will, and the opportunity to work with the team to help take it to the next level, to get more awareness around it and get a lot more folks benefiting from it.
Greg, a couple quick questions based on some chat questions. Kubernetes, that's come up, and that's a newer capability that we've talked about here recently. Maybe you can talk about a little bit about that and even share with folks, how are we licensing that's so different from perhaps the rest of the industry?
Yeah, maybe I'll begin with that one because the architecture kind of lends itself to our customers' advantage here. Everything is all in one. That's the beauty of it. That's the benefit of it. You get everything. What that means is our licensing is extremely simple. It's one license. It's one piece of software, one code base. It comes with everything because everything's in that operating system. So it makes it very easy. We charge per server. We don't care how many cores you have. We don't know how much storage you have. Single, very easy to use, per server license. As far as Kubernetes, yeah, we just recently added some integrated modules for Kubernetes so it can talk to our storage and networking, and we're going to continue to add to that.
Another question for you, Greg, is just about automation tool chain support.
So we have some stuff built in for automation, between our tasking engine, our recipe engines, things like that. But at the same time, being that everything is API first, and we have a single API that can control everything in the product, that's made it also very easy for us to start to be able to integrate with existing orchestration layers. And
By the way, the other thing I'll mention real fast is part of my reason for joining as well is that as I talked to some of the customers of Verge, what I got was, I mean, I kind of asked these open-ended questions like, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And I got back typically like really passionate, like excited answers. And I remember the early days at VMware when people had maybe seen their first vMotion or something like that. And they were so passionate about how cool the tech was and, blah, blah, blah. And this kind of energy. And I definitely feel a similar sort of energy here with Verge, with the Verge customer base, that there is something interesting and different happening here, something unique and special. And there's an excitement that goes along with that for any sort of technologist to be involved in that. And that's one of the things I really loved about VMware, and especially in the early days. And it's something that really resonated with me here as well. And so there's all these technologies, and they're all starting to come together. And as Greg talks about, there's things are building out. There's still a lot of stuff to do. We know that, right? But the core of it, the core innovation is there. And I think that's what I see the excitement around, and really excited to continue working with folks to build on that.
Yeah, so we're talking about we have some of the kind of the five key things that I think this efficiency pays off. And the one I wanted to talk about, just because I'm a storage guy, and it's the thing that hit me, is because dedupe lives where it lives, the entire environment benefits, right? If you're running dedupe on an external storage array, the
Yep.
transport back, the only thing that's deduped is the stuff inside that array, right? And in our world, everything benefits because dedupe lives in the OS itself. And so it just, just the benefits of that. The other big one to me is the optimized networking, is that, again, everything is in there. It's all built in. Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about some of this stuff and why it happens this way?
Yeah, well, and some of the, especially on the storage side, some of the placement of that, like the deduplication, for example, it not only gives us the straight benefits of deduplication from a storage, efficiency standpoint, but we're also leveraging it to get performance benefits, like being able to move now that it is a first-class citizen and part of the file system itself. We can move that and leverage that same deduplication within, things like our RAM cache and really optimize RAM and cache hits to be dedupe aware. But we're also using it as part of the feature functionality set of the product. So when I build out a tenant that is, 100 terabytes in size or whatever it is, like if I want to make a copy or clone of that environment, I can do that in about 30 milliseconds, regardless of how big it is, and immediately hit start, and it's running. And I could do that because of the storage. It's because of the functionality of that storage and that deduplication that it's not, traditional snapshot and traditional ways of or copies or clones, that might exist. It's leveraging that built-in storage engine. And we do the same thing, on the networking side. It's not just optimizing that network for performance, but also from security standpoint. So like when we create these, tenancies and things, we can put them on top of their own encapsulated networks very easily so that if I've got two tenants with the exact same IP addresses, MAC addresses, and everything else, they can't affect each other, right? Because the networking stack is aware that it's going to be used in this multi-tenancy type of environment and get you that level of security and isolation that you need. So everything plays together, right? It all works together, and you not only get the direct first line benefit, but there's all these other benefits that stack on top of each other.
Yeah, I mean, just to hit this home a little bit for people, like an analogy I think of about this architecture integration um, aspect is think about like virtual machines versus containers. Now, virtual machines are built to be highly isolated and constrained. That is their design from the beginning. And this is a abstraction that's held up, 20 plus years now in the industry. Containers were not built. I mean, they contain sort of, but they're very leaky, and it's not as clean of an isolation. And anyone will tell you who's deep into security would tell you never put two different customers' data in containers running directly on the same operating system. That is a security problem. Now, why is that? Well, it turns out that when they're doing containers, they're sort of retrofitting Linux with like some of these kind of isolation, like process isolation, memory isolation, et cetera, et cetera. But there's always like little ways that like data can creep in between them. And it's like really hard to retrofit an operating system to create these sort of isolation boundaries as clean as VMs. And so this is, I think, one of the big important things here. Not to say containers aren't as good as VMs, they're just different. They're different purpose, right? But the point of it all is that it's really, really hard to go back and retrofit something after some certain like foundational design decisions were made. And this is, I think, the big difference with Verge. This is why you can't, this is why it's so hard for someone like VMware with 20 odd years of history to go and change the architecture so fundamentally. It's just, you kind of need to restart. And I think that's the opportunity that Verge has had. And what it delivers is all these sort of benefits here, which are really, really, really hard to get if you have the more traditional architecture.
What about some protection? George has a long history of in data protection. George, what are we doing around protection, and is it any different than anyone else?
Well, I'll tell you a funny conversation I had with Greg when I was joining the company. He said to me, "We don't need backup." And I said, "Oh, this is going to be a problem. I'm a backup guy." And so I set about to prove him wrong. And I don't know if I can. Now, not going to say throw it out. We have over compatibility. It'll work with any backup software that supports over. Basically, that's Veeam right now today. So you don't need to throw out backup if you don't want to. But I can name big customers that have kind of gone through this path and they've lowered or lessened their backup licenses. And my theory always been that the primary part of the infrastructure, be it primary storage or the infrastructure itself, has really dropped the ball and put too much pressure on backup, right? So you at least want to balance. And if you look at that list there, I'm not going to read them all to everybody, but there's two that I'm going to highlight. One is Greg just talked about our multi-tenancy capabilities, our virtual data centers. I will tell you that as a guy that used to run DR tests for people, the thing that would always screw them up is they forgot the last 100 IP addresses they just added. And they didn't get captured anywhere, right? And they forgot to back up all kinds of stuff, right? Or they got over there without any of their network config, right? So all that stuff is a mess. Well, we get it every time we take a snapshot. We get everything in a perfect, consistent state every single time. And then the second one this is again another conversation I had with Greg. I was reading through on what we call internally in the product, we call the backup server, we call it IO Guardian. And I said, "Wait, does it actually do this?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I don't know if you remember the conversation, Greg, but you said it kind of worked out better than I thought it would. And we
Yes.
have whole things on IO Guardian, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but its ability to backfill data in line. It's kind of like the best way I can describe it. It's almost like a parity server for your environment. So you could exceed your threshold of data protection, and this thing will step in and continue to serve.
Yeah, it's smart enough to use your backups in real time automatically. If there are some, if you were to have a double failure, failure going on, it's going to make its own last ditch effort to just go out to your backup servers, grab blocks on the fly, and keep things up and running.
So, Kit, I don't know how much time you've had to spend on the data protection side, but anything that jump out at you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think again, like this, the fundamental architecture change like opens up all sorts of cool things. I think this is just like one example of many of how this sort of shift can drive benefits. And so, I think, you can go down the list as we've been doing. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Right. But I think you hit the key, George. It's because we are the all-in-one. The backups are not, you're not backing up your VMs and backing up your network and backing up, all these different components, and you have snapshots on your SAN and, it's everything goes along for the ride. And it's an atomic view of everything along for the ride. Whatever users you had in the system, all your networking rules, all your configs, your VMs, and the VMs even, you're not going down a list of back up this VM and then 2 hours later it backs up the SQL server and now your application server and SQL are out of whack, right? It's an atomic snapshot of everything as it all related together at that time. And then the backup, the external backups are going to give you vendor redundancy is really what that's the use case for that final backup. But leveraging our built-in snapshots and replication, you can take care of all your real-time, backup DR. You got all your snapshots, you got your historical views, and then you got that final offsite if you want to get that last backup off to get some vendor redundancy and throw it somewhere outside of Verge, you can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think all of this stuff, to me, data protection, maybe I'm a little too invested in it, but it's great if we can move you off the platform. It's great if we can save you a ton of money, but then if we go lose all your data as the next thing, that's not going to win a lot of friends, right? So it's that really becomes an issue. Now, Greg, what I want to do is stop right here. So let me stop sharing if you're ready, and we'll let you take it away.
Sure. Yeah. When George asked me to kind of demo off one of my favorite features, I can't pick one, but
It's like picking a favorite child, right?
yeah, exactly. Well, and not only that, it's it's also kind of hard to demo what's under the hood, right? The architecture. But what I did want to kind of focus in on is to really kind of drive home kind of what we're saying, that this is not just your hypervisor, a replacement hypervisor, or even a replacement, virtual storage. That it really is the private operating system, right? It's all the pieces that you need here, and so when you start to take advantage of those, it goes beyond just providing you with the infrastructure, but also starting to change how you might even do your day-to-day IT work. So one of the things, there's a couple cool features that one in particular I want to kind of show off, because we obviously use Verge every day here. We do all our software development on it. We do our QA testing. Everything is built, and we leverage this day to day. So, one of the things I needed to do is we were trying to do some, benchmarking of the product. We need to do regression testing for performance, and do some tweaks and everything. And so you got to fire up a bunch of workloads, and we could do this more traditional way and write some scripts and fire stuff up and everything. But what's kind of cool is the functionality is already in the product. So, we have our recipe system, right? And with the recipes, you can not only create recipes for individual VMs, you can also create entire tenancies and everything. But these recipes are a little more advanced than just taking an image and running it. You also can kind of leverage some of the built-in API functionality, build your own questions. We could tie it into our task engine. You could even run some mini scripts and stuff. I was going to just kind of show off one of the recipes that we have here. And our so we had built our own little benchmark thing that we run inside of a VM. And anytime I want to fire this up, I can go and fire off this recipe for our file system performance test. And you see it's got these custom questions. Now this is, and I just want to point out, nothing you're seeing here was custom code that we wrote as Verge. Anybody could have built this, right? This is so our recipe system allows you to create these questions and answers, feeds it into the VM as an answer file, but it also gives you access to the API itself that you can make manipulations for. So like in this example, I'm firing up a VM that's going to kick off one of these tests, and I'll just do like a quick random read test. These are all settings that go into our little test program that we have, and this is gonna and I can even have it run multiple instances of it. Let's see, we're gonna throw that on this network, and I'm gonna create 4 VMs of this, and so I just go ahead and we'll just run that for a minute here. We'll run 8 threads in here, so we submit this. And what that did is it went ahead and created 4 virtual machines. They should be running by now, probably. Yep. So we got 4 little speed tests here. You can see it firing up the cloud init. It already kicked off the speed test. And I could probably see, we can already see his CPU ramping up. We see some transfer rates going on. Let's see if we can see what this is doing to our infrastructure here. Let's see, what are we up to? Oh yeah, our IOPS our throughputs are throwing up here. We're up to 16 gigabytes a second. And so you could see that was just 4 VMs I needed to create to kick up a benchmark, and it took me a matter of seconds, right, to fire that up, and it's going to automatically shut itself down, clean itself up. We've got scripts, we've got recipes that we've built for running Verge systems within Verge, and just SQL workloads and just everything that we need to do that is, I don't need to go in a command line, write code and scripts and things. I can just do it very easy here in a GUI and start to change the way I work day to day. Not, so it's not just about the virtualization itself, right? And along those lines, we had somewhat recently added a whole tasking engine, which is also pretty cool. And so, you've got events, we've got schedules that I can create to kick off different tasks. I can even do some custom scripts. We can tie into webhooks if you want the system to push to a third-party environment. Um, but basically, I can, create different tasks, and you kind of hook into different events within the systems. Like, anytime my Let's Encrypt certificate renews, I want it to do something, send me an email. In fact, this is a real one we do a lot of times is, like Let's Encrypt when they need to encrypt or refresh a certificate, you need port 80 open. I don't want port 80 open most of the time, though. I don't use it for anything else. So we set up a task in here that says anytime let's encrypt, before it renews the certificate, enable port 80, and then when it finishes, disable the rule. And so it's fully automated. I didn't have to write any code. I just built some task events. So you create the task of what you want it to do, and then you hook it into an event. So I can have an event be that if somebody turns on a VM or if they reboot a VM or uh, there's all sort. If an alarm is raised, so there's somebody connects to a console, I can have it do something. And again, then those what it actually then does could talk to a webhook or talk to a third-party system or turn on another VM. I could say, hey, anytime somebody fires up this SQL server, fire up all the application servers automatically. Um, so anyway, I just wanted to show a little bit of that because it's cool that again you go beyond just fire up my VMs and then I don't touch the system until I need to make another infrastructure change. There's things you can start to leverage day to day, and just how you do your normal workloads here.
That's awesome. So I think it's also pretty cool that you're like you kind of just blew by it because you're kind of used to it. But unless I missed it, like in a few seconds, you also not only did you get that test going, but you also created the VMs and everything, right?
Yeah, it created the VMs from scratch, fired them up. It already shut them down automatically, so they're no longer running. Um, yeah, yep, no longer running there. Yeah, it's fully automated, and like I said, I can ask whatever questions I want, feed it all in. Yeah, anyway, I know we only had a few minutes to show something quick off, so that's my show and tell. Again, like I said, it's cool that it's beyond just the virtualization. We leverage Verge every day to do our jobs.
Kip, we want to give you some time to see what final thoughts you may have, what you'd like to share with folks that have joined us today before we head out.
Yeah. I think kind of like I was alluding to before about the customer excitement that I'm seeing with Verge and how reminiscent it is of the early days of VMware. I think, like VMware 20 odd years ago, we were at the start of a very long and very fun journey, and I feel like Verge is exactly there as well. The foundation is set, it's strong. There's strong technology base there, and this tremendous amount of opportunities to grow and evolve and to support all sorts of different customer workloads. And so I'm really excited to go on that journey, to work with the Verge team as well as all of you on the line today, to realize this next generation architecture and take your environments to that next generation.
Greg, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up today?
No, I mean, other than, I'm very excited to have, Kit, be a part of this company and he's been through a parallel, but also a much earlier, journey through this whole process. And, we're looking forward to picking his brain. I mean, I know how it is when you build something out, you add to it, and then you're always thinking, oh, I wish I could go back and change this and change this. And I'm sure Kit's full of all sorts of ideas and things that they would go back and change, and we would absolutely looking forward to picking his brain.
Thank you, Greg. George, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
Well, just to answer directly one of the questions that came in the chat that I wanted to make sure didn't get missed, but the basically what's the motivation? And I think what we see is, is three. I mean, obviously, what gets people to come to the door, if you will, is the licensing issue, right? And you see it all the time, Aaron. I see it all the time. You're talking 6 to 10x type of price increases that people are facing. So that's there. And obviously Greg mentioned the server license. We license by the physical server, not by number of cores or sockets or amount of RAM or amount of storage. So it's a really simple licensing thing. And then but once you get beyond that, I think the two that I see the biggest beyond that come up, I think right now hardware longevity is a big deal, right? Greg mentioned that we use our stuff. Our entire website is hosted by a VergeOS system, and all our hands-on labs obviously are hosted by a VergeOS system. I checked yesterday. I haven't checked today, but we had 67 labs active, and I think that hardware is all about 8 years old, and nobody complains about performance. And for us, it's a production workload, because if you're evaluating our product and it crashes, that's not so good. So that's the other one. And then I think the final one that I hear very consistently is operational simplicity. Everybody gets some time back in their day.
Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.